South Africa, like the rest of the world, is faced with the challenge of having to grow its economy whilst addressing the very real threat of climate change. Although growth need not be a threat to sustainability, it could be if growth isn't properly managed on a country, regional and global level. Hello and welcome to Climate Change Perspectives. I'm Eleni Jokos, and joining me in studio is my guest host, Daniel Kinnear, Senior Executive Associate at Africa Strategy Group. And this week, we take a closer look at the relationship between growth and sustainability by discussing the implications of the Stern and Gates reports, the Green Climate Fund and South Africa's carbon tax on both business and the economy. And here to share their views on the subject, Kumi Naidoo, Executive Director at Greenpeace, and joining us from our bureau in Cape Town, Philip Lloyd, Research Professor, Energy Institute, Cape Peninsula University of Technology. A very warm welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so very much for joining us. Kumi, I'd like to start off with you. The G20 meeting, very commonly known as just talk shop and no real decisive action occurring. And the big focus, of course, coming through was Greece, the EFSF, and of course the IMF's role in terms of saving the economic issues that we've been seeing coming through from that region. Did climate change even get an iota of a perspective from these leaders?
Well, sadly, our 20 most powerful national leaders in the world showed that they did not have an ability to multitask, and they used, I would say, the Greek crisis as a opt-out from real public conversations around climate change. However, there were private conversations that were happening behind the scenes, but sadly it did not have the kind of public profile that was necessary. I should also say that from our perspective, what the G20 has delivered as the G8 over the last 4 years since the financial crisis started has been really to put a big band-aid over the problem and hoping that it'll go away. And as far as I'm concerned, all that this G20 has done has put yet another band-aid that will probably within 6 months need another solution. So right now we would say that our leaders are making a terrible miscalculation by not seeing the linkage between environmental degradation and climate change on the one hand and the financial crisis, and trying to bring them together and address them in a synergistic way such that we can have a win for the environment and a win for the economy moving forward.
Yeah, but Professor Lloyd, I recall just reading something you published, or that was published, on your views on the Stern report, for example. We'd like to get your perspective on what is your view to the question Eleni just put to Kumi on the G20 and maybe in the road to COP17?
Well, I think the world's leaders are telling us something and have been telling us something for quite a long while. You will recall 2 years ago there was a grand meeting at Copenhagen where it was confidently expected that something would happen. And the answer was, if it hadn't been for our own President Zuma stepping forward and managing to wrinkle an accord out of Copenhagen, things would have fallen completely flat. You will recall there's a great worry about whether the Kyoto Protocol will be renewed at this COP17 coming up. It seems most unlikely that it will do, and you can then look at the history of the Kyoto Protocol and see whether it's achieved anything. If anything, it has dropped the emissions of the world by about 0.1%. It has been around for 12 years and has effectively achieved nothing. So it's quite clear to me that the leaders of the world don't view this problem as a very serious problem. Otherwise, they'd be doing something about it.
Do you think that they should be, Professor, viewing this as a very serious problem?
Well, I've got to look at it from a South African perspective. And the moment I look at it from a South African perspective, I think it's doubtful whether we can do more than contribute to the overall global solution. I think that there is a belief that because COP17 is being held here, we've got to take a lead. I'm not certain that we're in a position to take a lead.
Professor Lloyd, while I agree with you that we are a big emitter in Africa, the biggest by far, let's not underestimate that we are actually the 12th largest emitter globally. And secondly, part of why Greenpeace and other environmental groups and other anti-poverty groups as well, including some of the global trade unions now, are arguing for us to actually move in the direction of a green economy, is because there is a calculation being made that the countries that will dominate the future economy will be those that get ahead of the green technology curve now. So China, yes, it's a big emitter, yes, it's still building coal-fired power plants, but in the first quarter of 2010, they became the major investor globally in renewable technology. And in my meetings with the Vice Minister for Planning in Beijing last year, I came out of that meeting very, very clear. Yes, they're concerned about climate change, but they have also made an economic calculation that in terms of the medium to long-term interests of strengthening their economy and surpassing the US and becoming the largest economy in the world, part of that, a key part of that, is to actually dominate the future green economy. It's coming. Those countries that drag the feet will pay a big price in terms of economic competitiveness in the future, and that is also part of why Greenpeace and others are arguing for decisive and urgent move, apart from the devastating consequences of climate change that we're already seeing in many parts of the developing world.
Yeah, but you know, one of the Professor touched on the point that the Kyoto Protocol has not, to date, shown significant benefits in addressing climate change. But that's probably because the major emitters have not signed up on the Kyoto Protocol. And for the Kyoto, what will replace the Kyoto Protocol? Even if it's deficient, shouldn't be the focus in Durban be more towards strengthening the instruments around the Kyoto Protocol, bringing in the Green Climate Fund, looking at mitigation like carbon taxes in South Africa, which I know, Professor Lloyd, you are not a strong protagonist of. I mean, what choices do we have? What choices does society have at the moment? You know.
Well, firstly, let me say that I agree with the sentiment expressed by Professor Lloyd about the fact that developed countries, or the biggest emitters, but certainly developed countries that historically carry a bigger burden of creating the sort of carbon debt that we have, must take lead. So the Kyoto Protocol is signed by developed countries only, with the exception of the United States. So I've not thrown the towel in, and people in the global environmental movement have not thrown in the towel about Kyoto. We are going to go to Durban, and yes, it's true, France, Russia, and Japan, Russia, and Canada are trying to make Durban the burial ground for Kyoto, but we're going to push to defend that, and I think we're in with a 50-50 chance. But the important thing is we have to also, when you judge whether Kyoto succeeded or not, you have to put in two factors there. One is the US, the biggest per capita emitter in the world, right, given its population size, was not a signatory, right, and that creates part of the problem. And secondly, I would argue that emissions levels would be significantly more in terms of growth in the developed countries had it not been for Kyoto.
Okay. Professor, I'd like to get your sense just on Kumi's thoughts when it comes to China. Yes, as you mentioned, increasing emissions as it stands right now, but also having a greener technological strategy that is in place at this point in time. You also alluded to the fact that South Africa at this point feels that it needs to take the lead because we are going to be hosting COP17. Is this reason enough for us not to have a greener strategy and a greener approach to the way that we create electricity and generate electricity? We're using coal, which is, of course, we know, a very dirty resource. Surely there's more that can be done, such as embarking on ensuring that there's solar panels in every single house in South Africa, just like we see in Europe.
I think it's true that there is a move towards trying to make things a good deal greener, but as an engineer I have to warn that the numbers are against doing anything rapidly. For instance, last year the renewable energy sector grew faster than it's ever grown before. However, the coal sector grew 12 times faster than the renewable energy sector last year. The gas sector grew 10 times faster than the renewable energy sector, and the oil sector grew 6 times faster. So altogether, the fossil fuel side of the energy equation grew 28 times faster than the renewable energy side of things did last year. The renewable energy isn't going to take over any day soon for a whole range of very clear and definable reasons. You can't run an industry off solar panels. Unfortunately, you have to have big baseload supplies of energy in order to run a thing. And that is what the world has found. 86% of the world's primary energy comes from fossil fuels today. And all the extrapolations taking into account China's moves and all the rest, suggests that by 2050 we might be down to as low as 70%, but it's going to include a very large measure of
Professor,
nuclear.
let me ask you this.
Do you think that 70% fossil fuels?
Do you think South Africa is doing enough? Do you think that South Africa is doing enough, though, with regards
South Africa, in its IRP 2010, has got some very, very ambitious targets. We would like to try and move in those directions, and it's very very good that we're trying to do this. However, the costs of this are constantly coming home. There was a complaint yesterday, for instance, about the fact that the cost of solar power had been reduced by the National Energy Regulator. It had been reduced because the costs of solar power are, in fact, the cost of production are falling, and therefore the price we're prepared to pay for it is falling at the same time. So the people who are trying to get solar power in are complaining about the fact that their profitability is being attacked because the price that we're prepared to pay for it is falling. But then the cost of production is falling at the same time. So they shouldn't really be complaining, but it just illustrates some of the difficulty we're having in trying to get this thing going faster.
Professor Lloyd, let me just take issue with you with the stats that you presented about the growth in renewable energy versus the investment we've seen in fossil fuels. I think firstly, we need to recognize that obviously the huge amount of taxpayer-funded fossil fuel subsidies that enables the growth of fossil fuels, we have very limited in comparison terms, subsidies being given to the renewable energy sector, and in fact there are lots of barriers to the actual growth of the renewable energy sector. Secondly, I agree with you that we cannot do it overnight. I have not heard any serious public commentator or activists or people involved saying that it needs to happen with a click of our fingers. What we are saying is we need an ambitious and an urgent plan to actually move us in the direction of lessening our dependence on what are finite resources. So we are playing catch up, and we have to do this in a smart way. Yes, we can't do it overnight, but we also need to be sensitive to the job creation potential moving forward. And if we became serious about bringing together social needs and economic needs and environmental needs, where we didn't put the interests of big oil, coal and gas companies and their profits above the interests of ordinary people, I think we can actually, by 2050, reduce our dependence on fossil fuels by at least 80 to 90% on a global basis. But it means us recognizing that people are dying now from climatic impacts. The facts are 350,000 people are dying annually already from climatic impacts. Resource wars have started now, Darfur, Horn of Africa, Somalia and so on. The impacts are here. We just have to look at the news to look at violent weather events. So we are playing political poker with the future of our children and grandchildren. And from not just from an environmental perspective, but from a social perspective, we absolutely need to have a faster transition to a green economy, which will be good for the economy in the long term, especially given our continent, Africa, has been blessed with huge potential in solar, wind, wave, even geothermal and so on, which we are not harnessing even to the tune of 5% of the renewable capacity that we have on the African continent.
Professor, your response, please.
I've heard the story before, but if you actually go out and look and try to make an ascription to the climate change to the fight in Darfur, you'll find that it's got nothing to do with climate change whatsoever. And this is one of the big problems. And for instance, one of the worst culprits of this was Lord Stern, who predicted that it would be a very good idea if we impoverished ourselves right now by spending half our total income this year to avoid a problem that might turn up in 200 years' time. His insurance policy was about the worst insurance policy I've ever seen. To suggest that we should spend half our income today on trying to fix a problem that might turn up in 200 years' time really affects the livelihoods of our children very badly indeed.
Please, let's hit pause there, and we'll continue this heated debate right after this. Don't go anywhere.